على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, through the month of Ramadan, we're looking at understanding the calls to the believers in the Qur'an. And these are those verses that begin with Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe. And we looked yesterday at the seventh call, which was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's call to give of what He has provided for us. And we saw how that giving is both the giving of wealth, that our wealth is just a little of what Allah has provided for us, and we have to just give a little of that little. But that's an obligation, and there should be an urgency in it, because a day will come when it is your good deeds that avail you, not your worldly gains and sources of worldly support that you work so hard to construct. The eighth call is related to the seventh in that it is also about giving in charity. And it is about how you go about giving in charity. Because charity has a purpose and it is a sign. The purpose of charity ultimately is that it is a means of purifying one's heart and one's relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The outward giving has an inward spiritual purpose. But it is also a sign. Charity, sadaqah, is a sign of what? Of the quality of sidq. That are you true? Are you true in your faith? Are you true in your commitment? Are you true in your concern for Allah's creation? Say, oh, I care about this and I care about that. Well, what do you give? Nothing. Because the outward is a sign of the inward. They say, the outward is not sufficient without inward realities of sincerity and concern. But the inward is not true if it does not have at least the striving for outward expression. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, having exhorted us throughout Surah Al-Baqarah to give and to care, calls us to give in a certain way, to be careful in one's giving about the underlying meaning in that giving. So He tells us subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who believe, La tubtilu sadaqatikum bil manni wal adha, do not void your charity with reproach and hurt. كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس, like the one who spends of their wealth out of showing off for people. ولا يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر, and they don't believe in Allah and the last day. فمثله كمثل صفوان عليه تراب, their example is like the example of a smooth rock on which there is soil. فَأَصَابَهُ وَابِلٌ, upon which a torrential rain falls. فَتَرَكَهُ صَلْدًا, and leaves that rock completely barren. So the rock looked like it had soil on it, so that if rain came down, what would happen? If there's soil, then there's rain. Vegetation should grow forth. But here, there's this rock, it had soil on it, but that soil was just loosely on that rock. So when the rain came, it actually just washed away the rock. لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا, they have no power over anything that they've earned, because it's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلِلَّهِ مَا أَعْطَى وَلِلَّهِ مَا أَخَذ, Allah says what He gives, and Allah says what He takes, if you choose to take it. وَاللَّهُ لَا يَهْدِي الْقَوْمَ الْكَافِرِينَ, and Allah does not guide the people who reject belief. So there's this warning, which is, we saw the similar warning with respect to giving again. And it's not an accident that charity is called sadaqah, because it's a sidq. It's a proof of, they say it's dalilu sidq al-iman. It's a proof of the trueness of one's faith. Do you really believe? Do you really believe that Allah is the provider? Do you believe in the promise of Allah? Right? Do you follow through on that? Do your actions bear true to that commitment that you have? So let's look at these verses, at this verse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by saying, لا تبطلوا صدقاتكم. Do not render your charity vain. Is the charity itself voided? Because what is charity? It is to give. But when you give, if you gave it with a wrong intention, is the charity itself voided? No, because the person took it and they'll benefit from it. But what is voided? The reward. Right? Telling us that the reality of actions is not simply what you do, but what motivated you to do it. The action is a form, but its reality is the intention that is underneath it, and how you go about doing it. So one of the things that could wipe out the reward of the charity is insincerity, as will come in a bit about the one who gives showing off. They don't have reward. So the one who gives showing off doesn't have reward to begin with. They just gave so people could praise them. But similarly, you could void your reward, meaning that you had great reward. You may even have been sincere. But what did you lack? You lack the right approach to giving. That do not void your charity by two qualities. بالمن والأذى. Right? Through hurtful reminders and injury. And we'll see each of these. So, and that's a serious loss. Right? That is a serious loss. Why? Because the reward of charity is tremendous. Right? It's one of the things that's described that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewards beyond measure for it. So its reward is tremendous. Its spiritual benefit in your relationship with Allah is tremendous. Right? Both in nurturing sincerity, in expressing trueness, in expressing concern for others. And by expressions of concern, you acquire concern. So someone, if they're selfish, for example, they couldn't really care. So I worked hard, I struggled, why should I help others? They don't really care about others. How do you change inwardly? You change inwardly through outward actions as well. So okay, well, give like a person who cares gives. And eventually you find within you that you will be caring. And likewise with every other quality that you look at. If you're looking for an inward virtue, you look at what's the right outward conduct. You keep doing it and the inward change will come. And two qualities annul charity: reproach and insult. Reproach, men, and I was following men can be translated in a number of different ways, but men reproach is by reminders of that charity, reminders of favor, right? By reminders of favor. So if you help someone, and this goes beyond charity, this applies to any good that you did for another, that's meant to be for the sake of Allah. So you help someone out. Why do you help people out? It's supposed to be for the sake of Allah. So someone needed help getting to the hospital. So you drove them. But then you go, by the way, can I borrow your iPad for the weekend? I took you to the hospital last week. And and that's that's imtinan. It's a reminder of a favor. A reminder of a favor. And it can be direct, and it can be indirect. Direct, you're just explicit about it. So I lent you the money that day. Can I have such and such? Can I come over for that iftar that you're having tomorrow? Because I heard from my wife that your wife said that the food's good, the special menu. And any reminder of favor is imtinan, is this hurtful reminder or a reminder of favor. And adha is that you say or do that which will hurt them as a result. One of them is to mention that you gave them. So, and very often people, they showcase a poor family, for example. This month we've helped out 5 families in Mississauga, and picture of family A. And do people feel really good? Oh, we were helped out this month? No, most people don't like, they didn't choose to be in need, and they don't, they probably agree to it because you ask them, and that happens a lot with charities as well. Right? The photo opportunity. Here we are with this poor family, look how good we are, right? Like sort of, and sometimes we like picking on white people because we call it the white savior complex, right? But if you look at Muslim charities, for example, many times they'll do the same thing. Right? And that's hurt. And if the hurt is far away, doesn't make it any less hurtful. That you're doing it with people overseas is the same, or you're doing it with people locally, and it also applies in one's circles of friends. That it could be and it could be indirect. Indirect such that the indirect reminder of favor or the indirect hurt. Sometimes asking people how they're doing, etc., if you're not careful, it's a type of adha, it's a type of hurt, especially if you do it in front of people. Because either people know what you're talking about, or the person knows that, the person feels that other people will know. They say, oh, so how are things going, etc., is everything okay with the family? But the people hearing may sense that, well, you're highlighting that this person is in need, or they may feel, and it may not be the case, the people may be clued out, but the person may feel that you're highlighting that they're a needy person. So that's against sincerity. And both of these, the hurtful reminder and the adad and the insult can be from the beginning of the action. From the beginning. Like you tell them, look, I'll lend you this money, I'll give you some financial assistance, but make sure you do such and such. And that's not correct. Or sometimes they insist you take a picture. Some Muslim charities I know, right? So they'll give you the money, but you pose for a picture. Amongst the types of adha is that sometimes it's important to have a certain amount of diligence about who's receiving the charity. But there's a difference between diligence and embarrassing someone. So some masajid, for example, because a lot of people ask, they'll put a very token limit on how much they'll give people for zakat, like $200, which is actually, and at one level, if you have limited funds, you try to spread them as best you can, but the sunnah in giving is to free a person of their immediate need. أغنوهم عن المسألة, right? As the Prophet ﷺ said about Eid al-Fitr, for example, etc. So free the person of their immediate of the immediate need to ask. So they'll make them fill out detailed forms and to swear by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they're correct in this and all these kinds of things, and many people find it hurtful. So one should be careful. Rather, the Prophet ﷺ said that if a person comes and asks, give them, even if they come riding on a horse. And that's like if someone comes driving in a Mercedes and says, I need some money. Of course, the discretionary charity you give, the charity you give by choice and consideration, you give to those most needy and most deserving. But you do so in a manner that doesn't embarrass, nor disgrace, nor hurt the person being given to. And the reminders can happen after as well. which are the more obvious hurtful reminders. The verse talks about charity itself, sadaqat. That don't render your charity null and void through reminders and hurt, but it also applies to any other favor that one does. You lent someone something. You loaned them some money. You helped them out in some way. The same two things diminish or can, as the verse mentions, completely vitiate, void the reward. And a sign that you did something sincerely for Allah, whether it be charity or any other type of assistance, is that you don't expect anything from the other person in return. Because by definition, if it's for Allah, then it wasn't that they thank you afterwards. It wasn't that, well, I'll give them some charity and inshallah they'll do this. And as a result, you wouldn't hurt them. This also applies, and it's very tricky, to when one serves others. There's some kind of khidmah, right? Volunteers. That if your volunteering was for the sake of Allah, you shouldn't be seeking praise, recognition, appreciation from it. So don't expect that. And that's one of the reasons why assisting others is of such tremendous reward. Because most people are not appreciative. You go serve people in the soup kitchen, in a year, the biggest thing you'll probably get is someone complaining that, there's the people who complain that there's not enough salt, or the Arabs complaining that there's too much pepper, or other people complaining that there's not enough spice. But you spend a whole year running a soup kitchen, and you'll hear far more of complaints than you hear of people saying thanks. But you shouldn't remind people, nor of favor, nor hurt their feelings, as you know, because what does it indicate? It indicates that there's something there in your intention, that it wasn't purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas the spirit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to uphold in the Qur'an, إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ, we feed you only for the sake of Allah. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً, we seek no reward from you, nor thanks. And that's not easy. That's not easy. So this can wipe away the reward of one's charity. It also tells us, of course, that the feeling of people matter as much as their outward condition. So the person may outwardly be in need of financial assistance, of food assistance, of different types of assistance. But just as they have some outward needs and outward rights that we assist in fulfilling, they also have feelings. And the preservation, taking care of not hurting another person is just as important as taking care of their outward needs. It's so grave that hurting someone through a reminder or reproach that, well, I gave you this, how come you're not helping me out? That could wipe away the entire reward of the assistance you gave. So it tells you of how serious the feelings of others are, and the whole number of rulings of the Sharia related to taking care of the feelings of others. Amongst them is backbiting. You said something true, but another person dislikes it. And the Prophet ﷺ said, backbiting is so vile that were it something tangible and it were to fall into the ocean, it would pollute the entire oceans. And that's a metaphor that we should think about now, because we've been polluting the oceans actively for decades. And they're still not completely polluted, right? But that's how intensely vile backbiting is. And backbiting is mentioning the truth, but it's something that the other person would dislike, let alone when it's untrue. or you add to the sin of hurting the other person's feeling, you also did wrong. And you lied, right? So there's degrees of harm. So then a comparison is made. A comparison made. كالذي ينفق ماله رئاء الناس, like the one who spends their wealth to show off to people and does not believe in Allah and the last day. Because the one who shows off, riya wipes away reward of actions. Riya can be there at the beginning of the act, in which it wipes away the reward completely, or you could initiate the act sincerely, and then elements of showing off creep in, and to the extent they creep in, and they cover over the sincere motive, they remove the reward. One can end up committing a sin through a good deed. Like you did good, you started with a good intention, but the showing off is a sinful act. If there's elements of showing off, they'll erode the reward, but they could wipe away the reward. You could end up with greater sin. You could end up with greater sin as a result. And doesn't believe in Allah and the last day. And here, of course, this is not talking about absolute disbelief, that they are a disbeliever, but rather one who doesn't believe in, doesn't have hope. They're not actively hopeful of Allah and His reward in the hereafter. They're not moved by their faith to have hope in Allah, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather people seem more real to them. Right? And the point of comparison is the loss of reward. Right? The loss of reward, or even further, the falling of sin. And one of the great early Muslims, Ibn Sirin, who's most famous, especially because one of the early Islamic books, for some strange reason that was translated into English, was Ibn Sirin's Book of Dreams. But Ibn Sirin wasn't a dream interpreter. He was a great scholar of fiqh and hadith, and was one of the great early imams. Ibn Sirin saw a man saying to another man that, I did such and such for you, and I did such and such for you. So he told him, Uskut. He said, be quiet. فَلَا خَيْرَ فِي الْمَعْرُوفِ إِذَا أُحْصِي. He said, be quiet. There's no good in good that is recounted. And it's related that the Prophet ﷺ said that beware lest you hurtfully remind others of good that you've done, because it negates gratitude. Right? It negates gratitude, gratitude to Allah, and wipes away the reward. And then the Prophet ﷺ quoted these verses. Okay. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses a metaphor, right? That the example of such a person is like a smooth rock on which there's soil, and torrential rain falls upon that and leaves it just barren. It just washes away the soil. That soil is the good that you did, right? But what's the rock? That's like your heart. Your heart shouldn't be like a rock. Your heart, if it's sincere with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then you wouldn't just have a little soil on it, right? But your heart would be susceptible to rooting that that topsoil, so that if something is planted on it, it takes root not just in the topsoil, but the roots go deeper into the earth of your heart, so that when the rain comes, you are able to retain the water and nurture the good that you were trying to incline towards. So be careful of the state of your heart, because outward actions can be dangerous. Outward actions can be dangerous. Sometimes the outward things that we do make us content that, well, we got some fertilizer, we put it there. Alhamdulillah, I got a new jilbab, I got this. We just think about the outward, but we don't take care of the state of our heart or how we are privately with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happens? We do a little good and it could end up destroying us. Someone said, okay, I'm going to get active in the community, and they take a prominent position, etc. And they may be doing good, but if you don't take care of the state of your heart, what will it do? That good will not change how you are. It'll just be superficial. Tests will come. You'll be tested as to your sincerity, as to whether you genuinely care for others. I have a friend who was really struggling. Alhamdulillah, good company saves you. I have a friend, he studied overseas, he was really struggling spiritually, etc. But the guy is well spoken. He gave this rocking khutbah, but he was really struggling himself. He was barely, a mutual friend was dragging him out to perform his 5 daily prayers. But, he was in a bad state. But brilliant guy, well spoken. Gave this rocking khutbah. This guy came up to him after the khutbah, crying and said, your khutbah really moved me, I want to repent to Allah, etc. He said, I'm kind of hungry right now. I have a lunch appointment. Can we talk about this some other time? Okay. So how could you call other people to the good when you're not concerned about it yourself? But that's the danger of mere externalization of deen. That kind of religious practice can make you a worse human being. Right? A lot of people become active in the community. It's good. Serving others is important. But the first person you're responsible for is yourself. أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ. Allah SWT says, do you call others, do you command others to virtue and forget yourselves? كَبُرَ مَقْتًا. Right? Allah SWT, it's truly odious to Allah, right? That you say that which you do not do. And you don't have to, it could be, so I do those things, but there's other things that you're disregarding. So, don't be like that rock. Rather, soften your heart. How do you soften your heart? By the ways of turning to Allah, by nurturing sincerity, by nurturing hope and fear in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by having private worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, so it's not just what you're doing outwardly. They say a sign of being true is istiwa'u al-zahiri wal-batin, is that your outward and inward are the same. So you're not just doing good things in public, you should have some private things that you do as well. They say that if you do some kind of public good, you should try to do the like of it privately as well. So you're involved in the masjid, you're doing a lot of public things. You're well spoken, you're the MC, you make the announcements, you do this, you're the treasurer, you got these public positions. Do some service of the same type that other people don't find out about. Especially things that are maybe not so appealing to the ego. Like, go clean the toilets once in a while. Go do something else. Go throw out the garbage. Go do things quietly. And then don't go tell, say, subhanAllah, the washrooms are so difficult to clean. So how do you know? Oh, nothing. Say, no, how do you know? Say, this weekend I was, And that's a way of nurturing sincerity. And one should the Sahaba used to try to observe the Prophet ﷺ carefully, because a lot of what he did ﷺ was not public. But they used to, and there's a healthy spying that's from the Sunnah, right? Which is when you're trying to find out about the good in a good way. So it's not prying into other people's private affairs, but trying to discover the good. So I know he wouldn't want me to tell this, but for example, people like, and a lot of our scholars are like that, that a lot of much of the good that they do, you don't know about. I was once with Imam Tahir Anwar, and he looked kind of scary. I had, a few bad thoughts occurred to me because we're sitting in his car outside his mosque, and he seemed to be dealing with this guy in very shady circumstances. I'll give you this much for it. No, he said don't pay more than this, and they're negotiating. It sounded like a drug deal, to be honest, right? Like, what's this? I'm just trying to mind my own business, but so after we're done, we're driving away. I said, that must have looked shady, didn't it? I said, yeah. I said, and we're friends. I just told him straight up. So yeah, that sounded really weird. He said it isn't weird, and he explained. He said just to clarify, he without telling people, said you're one of the first people I'm telling. He would raise money from different people in the community, and he would help out homeless people by getting them to buy a minivan, a used minivan. Because one of the problems people who are homeless have, particularly in large urban areas, is that you can't go to look for a job because transportation is expensive. And if you're living out on the street, how are you going to even fix yourself up, etc.? So what he'd do, he'd help buy a cheap car, but there's certain things. He knows quite a bit about cars and buying and selling cars. So he'd make sure they negotiated a good price. A lot of homeless people probably don't know about car prices. And make sure they had the right EPA approval and this and that and the other. And he'd also give them some firm but caring advice about how to spend the money and how not to spend it. So that now if they had a minivan, you could park it in some parking lot, go to sleep there. You could go look for a job or nothing else. There's a lot of delivery kind of jobs, at least in the Bay Area, that you could get. You have a car, you're willing to drive around. Many of these kinds of things, that there's a lot of public good that sound like Imam Tahir does, but a lot of private good, and so many of our other scholars and teachers that people don't know about, right? And that's something to learn from, that one should observe from the righteous how they go about practicing their righteousness, right? So one of the things is, don't be just someone who has a few externals to your deen without a rock that is impermeable, that is your heart. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He rectify that. Right? Because then there'll be tests. Right? Just like that rock that has a shallow soil, there'll be some test. And that test could be of if you're lucky, the test will be of difficulties. Because when there's difficulties, it's easy to turn to Allah, the heart softens. But the more stern test is of success. It's like the rain's coming down, it's amazing. Right? Wow, now not only are you MC at your masjid, now you've been asked to give a public, you've asked to speak at the next RAS conference. So you go from having a small problem with your heart to being a big inflated problem. One of my teachers refers to what he calls microphone fever. He said students of knowledge get affected by microphone fever, and that's a sickness that if you catch it, you won't lose it. You want to hold on to the microphone because so it's like that torrential rain that hits. The rain should be a source of benefit, but it wipes away the person. And that happens with a lot of people, whether in their religious practice, etc. Some sisters started studying a little bit, so now in her family she becomes the religious go-to person. So now she takes over. But it changes her from being a completely reasonable person to an unbearable person. She's always looking down on people, putting people down, etc. So what does it do? Even that little outward good could be wiped away. And then what is the state of the heart in that? You're giving in charity, you're doing public good, etc. But if the heart doesn't benefit from it, then you start getting misgivings. Is this all worth it? Why am I doing this? So you have self-doubt, you have misgivings, etc. And many times people leave the whole thing. They're not even able to sustain that superficial good that they were apparently doing. So the believer, on the other hand, is meant to be like rich soil. They have outward good. They're like the tree. Right? The metaphor of the believer is like the tree in Surah Ibrahim, verse 14, right? Whose roots are firm. Right? That the good word is like the good tree, whose roots are firm in the heart of the believer, and whose branches are in the sky. It gives its fruit in every season. So it has outward good that's sustained at all times. They're a source of good. But the basis of that good is what? Is rooted in carefully nurturing and cultivating your heart. And there's many verses that emphasize this meaning elsewhere in the Qur'an as well. Rather, the believer, in taking care of their heart, also reminds themselves of the reality that the greatest thing that the Prophet ﷺ feared for the ummah, for his community, was not things that go against oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, I don't fear shirk for my ummah. I don't fear that you worship other than Allah. But rather, what was his fear? There are two central fears. One was showing off, that you do matters of religion for worldly motives. And two of the places where this is the greatest danger, or three of the places where this is the greatest danger, are with knowledge, with service, activism, and the third is in charity. Because these are external works of visible good. But if they're not done out of nurturing sincere concern, sincerely for Allah, they can destroy you. Al-Hasan al-Basri said, عقوبة أهل العلم موت القلب. He said the punishment of the people of knowledge is the death of the heart. So he was asked, وَمَا مَوْتُ الْقَلْبِ? I said, what is the death of the heart? He said, طَلَبُ الدُّنْيَا بِعَمَلِ الْآخِرَةِ. It is seeking this world with next worldly actions. And that's a danger that, it's like, I know someone an activist, who, it's like, who's doing good community work, this and that, but kind of hard up. Someone asked him to give khutbah at a local masjid, and it's like, turns out to be a wealthy mosque. And they gave, they gave like, I don't know what you call it, like they gave like an honorarium for him to give, he gave the khutbah. He said, came up to me and said, I should give the khutbah there regularly. Is there any way I can give the khutbah there regularly? I said, why? Like, people aren't usually that excited. He said, they gave $300. Right? So it started off fine. He went there genuinely to serve. But when he was pretty hard up, 300, he said, if I can give khutbah there monthly, that can take care of like a lot of things. You have to be careful. Say, well, but I'm also doing it for Allah. No. Sincerity is that you act solely for the sake of Allah and not for any ulterior motive. So you have to be careful about that. Praise is very dangerous too. You gave a talk expecting nothing from people. You did it for the sake of Allah. But people praise you for it. And then you give another talk, people praise you for it. It can affect why you do it, and even it'll affect the message. That you might not say what people need to hear. You just want to say things that people like to hear, because they'll praise you for it. And you're not actually benefiting them. And the sincere friend is not the one who says what you want to hear. The sincere friend is the one who tells you what you need to hear. So those are three areas: in seeking knowledge, in service. Because again, service, you did things, people say, oh, mashallah, they did such and such. And the third is in giving charity. The people recognize it. Which is why one should at least have a balance of public and private charity. So that, because in everything that you do, you check your heart. course, checking your heart doesn't mean that you leave doing a good deed. It doesn't mean that you leave giving in charity because you're worried about sincerity. Rather, it is that you work on your sincerity while doing the good. Fudayl ibn Iyad said that acting for other than Allah is showing off, but leaving good actions for the sake of other than Allah is also showing off. Because you acted for other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is insincere. Rather, sincerity is that Allah free you from both doing things for the sake of people and leaving things for the sake of people. So you're at a family gathering and you get this idea that, maybe I could share a few points of benefit about how the Prophet ﷺ used to break his fast. But then you get this thought that if I do this, people are going to be amazed. So let me not do it. Doing it because people would praise you is wrong, but leaving it, you thought you had the urge to say something of benefit, but then you got doubts. The sunnah is that you do it and you struggle against the ulterior motive. You don't leave it. You don't leave the good. And leaving the good, unless there's proper consideration behind it, leaving the good just because of fear of ulterior motives is not from humility. It's from putting yourself down. It's from weakness. It's a quality dislike. I asked Habib Ali al-Jifri that, there's some people, we have a problem with khutbahs in our community. There's a lot of terrible khutbahs. But a lot of people who are students of knowledge, etc., they don't give the khutbah. And why don't they give the khutbah? They say, I'm not sincere, I'm not this, I'm not that. I say, so why don't they do it? I said, well, like humility. I've rarely ever seen Habib Ali that upset. Like, I was worried that he might he was like, he says stuff. But he was upset, because not for any specific purpose, but they said, there's a need that's unfulfilled and you're stepping back from it just because of, rather what do you do there? There's something of the good that you want to do for the sake of Allah, but you fear ulterior motives. Struggle against those motives. And if you don't know how to struggle against it, find out how do you rectify your intention. But do the good. And work on honing your intention. Right? So, the believer, on the other hand, when the torrential rains fall, it brings their heart, makes their heart verdant. Right? Whether it's manifest blessings, the believer manifests great good through it. Or in tests, the believer manifests great inward qualities through it. They benefit both from the abundant rain of blessings and also in times of drought. Their heart shows its resilience. Right? And then the sign of a good deed is that it results in other good deeds. Right? A sign of a good deed that your charity was actually for the sake of Allah. Right? Is that it results in further good deeds. And that when the tests related to that matter appear, you respond right to them. And one of the tests that's mentioned here, right, is don't negate your charity through hurtful reminders. So, you helped someone out. Zubair needed, Uncle Jamil finally said yes, but said, you have 3 days to marry my daughter. But you have to give 10,000 in mahr. So, Zubair goes and doesn't know who to ask, so he goes to his wealthy aunt, Auntie Huda. He said, Auntie Huda, can I borrow $10,000? She said, sure. But then next time, Auntie Huda wants to attend this conference and Zubair does the ticket, say, oh, could I have a ticket, please? Now Zubair, and she won't pay for it. Right? The test that you gave that money, assisted sincerely, is when those occasions are, when the related test arises, that you're particularly careful not to benefit from it. That someone's a big donor, so you go and you pick up a book from Firdaus books and said, well, I'm taking this book. Okay? That's the type of men, of imtinan, that you're taking advantage of some good that you did before. So you have to be particularly careful. The early Muslims used to be so careful of doing that if someone had borrowed money from them and they're walking in the street, they wouldn't even walk in the shade of that person's house. They didn't want to take any favor from someone that they'd assisted in any way. That if someone had borrowed money from them, they wouldn't go and eat at their house. Because someone lent you money, you'd want to try to express your gratitude in some way, but that can become easily a taking advantage. So they'd be very, very principled about that. The mashayikh would be very careful about that when it came to knowledge. For example, Shaykh Adib Kallas, mornings at his house, at the end of Fajr time, you could go and read whatever you wanted with him. And he said, I don't ask my students and I don't demand from my students. I wish I could learn that, but it's a little difficult. So he wouldn't, even if someone came and they looked like clueless, but they want to study an advanced book, he said, look, I'm just like the doorman. Someone comes, I just open the door for them. So you could go read anything you wanted with him. But if you asked him to read a book, very often what would happen would be he couldn't find his copy of the book. Particularly because his granddaughter once, she was with Shaykh Adib and Shaykh Adib's wife, and they're like in their late 70s, Shaykh Adib was in his early 80s. So the granddaughter went to Jaddo's library. It's like, what a mess. All the different colored books are all in different places. She spent 6-7 hours in Shaykh Adib's library rearranging his books by color. Of course, different Islamic subjects don't have different colored books. So the books were all over the place. And Shaykh Adib was getting older, so sometimes he'd lose the book. Like we were covering this book, the Hashiyah of Imam Bajuri on the Sanusiya. He purchased 4 copies from me. I'd actually keep a spare copy in my bag, because very often Shaykh Adib wouldn't be able to find the book. Because actually, it's not that big a book. So he'd put it somewhere and would go. Or some helpful family member would come and said, why did Baba leave his book here? So they'd go put it away somewhere and he couldn't find it. But he would always pay for his copy of the book. One of my friends, one of my teachers, Sheikh Jihad Brown, wanted to cover the opening of Tafsir al-Razi with him. Shaykh Adib said, well, can you buy me a copy? So Shaykh Jihad went and got the best copy he could. It was like $120. This is in the late 90s. And $120 is a month and a half. At that time, it was a month and a half salary for a teacher at a madrasa. Because Shaykh Adib had a copy, but he couldn't find it in his library there. Some of his library was not in his own house. It was his son's house. It was a bit of a mess, and he was so busy, So he said, get me a copy. And he insisted on paying for it in full. Shaykh Jihad tried to mention a lower price. It's actually, it's a useful trick to know. Mentioning a lower price is not considered a lie Islamically. So let's say, Zubair bought some baklava for Auntie Huda, right? So he asked how much was it. So it's actually very expensive. He went to La Patisserie Royale and bought $150 worth of baklava. So it was about $50-$60. So she gives him $60. That's not, if you intend that it was $60 and more, it's not, if you do it, to help someone out, it's not considered a lie. You bought someone some shoes, they're nicer shoes but they gave you $50, but you got them $100 shoes. How much was it? It was just $50. Right? And you don't mean that the price was $50, it's $50 on you. Right? You can do that. Of course, you can't do that to your advantage. When you do it to help someone out, sometimes you may help someone, you do the groceries for them, you got a few extra things, and you don't tell the price, throw away the bill. That's not a lie. But he'd always pay for it, and he'd refuse not to pay. Why? Because you don't want to take any advantage of teaching someone, right? So they would be that careful. I'd learned that the sunnah was that you give gifts to others. So one of my teachers, I used to give a lot of time, Shaykh Hassan al-Hindi. So I'd go buy, if I found some nice book, I'd buy it from him. Then one day he took me aside, said, listen, I appreciate that you like me, and Jazakallah for getting me gifts, but don't do this. Don't do this. Because I don't want to be taking advantage of teaching you in any way whatsoever. If you want to maintain this relationship, stop giving me gifts. Of course, I ignored him and gave them. I was careful not to take advantage of that, but he would be very uncomfortable. And he would refuse. And several times he demanded to pay me. It helped that he was blind, so a few times I tried to slip the money into his pocket, and he hit me really hard on my hand. But that's how careful, right? That you want to do it purely for the sake of Allah. One of the scholars came to Toronto in the last few years, and he came and spent a good amount of time here. And we had had an honorarium for. He completely refused. And I know his financial situation. Broke! Exclamation mark. So, there's ways you get the money to. In the end, I took him aside. I said, just please accept it. He said, leave a person in their intention. So I came here purely for the sake of Allah. I said, yeah, and we're this is just a gesture for the sake of Allah. He said, and he broke down crying. He said, Wallahi, I only came here. I said, I know, and we only giving this just because for the sake of Allah. And he refused. I just opened his bag, I stuffed it in. I said, and and then Sidi Nazim walked by. He called me and said, why you make him cry, boy? I said, I didn't make him cry. So why is he crying? I said, I can't explain. And he was not impressed. But that's how important intention is. Right? So don't be like the one whose good works destroy their heart. Right? And you be like لا يقدرون على شيء مما كسبوا, because you have no ability over anything that you acquired. And then, so this is verse 264 of Surah Al-Baqarah. The next verse describes those who give for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? That's not part of the call itself, but this is how one should strive to be. وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ ابْتِغَاءَ مَرْضَاتِ اللَّهِ. The likeness of those who spend their wealth seeking the good pleasure of Allah. Right? وَتَثْبِيتًا مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ. And out of confirming themselves. تَثْبِيتًا لِإِيمَانِهِمْ وَلِصِدْقِهِمْ. Right? To confirm their faith, their trueness, their sincerity, to confirm their commitment to the good. Their example is also like that of vegetation. But كَمَثَلِ جَنَّةٍ. It's like the example of a garden. بِرَبْوَةٍ. Upon a hill, upon a gentle slope. أَصَابَهَا وَابِلٍ. It too was affected by torrential rain, like the rock. Both look like there was soil and rain will come, but what happens? When that rain fell, whether it's a rain of mercy or the rain of trial, but فَآتَتْ أُكُلَهَا ضِعْفَيْنِ. It brought forth its produce twofold. It didn't just have the good results that it normally has, but when tested, it gave even more. فَإِن لَمْ يُصِبْهَا وَابِلٍ فَطَلٍ. And if it is not affected by such rain, there's still dew there. Right? Because there's residual good in that. Good soil absorbs moisture. So even when there's not rain, because there's vegetation and there's moisture there, there'll be dew even when there's not rain. وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ بَصِيرٌ. And Allah sees all that you do. And Basir is not just that He sees it, is fully aware. Is fully aware. He sees what you do and what motivates you within your heart. Right? He sees what you do and what motivates you within your heart. The ulama say that the the qualities being pointed to in this verse of the righteous are four. Right? That they're giving, and likewise all their good deeds are ibtigha'a mardatillah, seeking the good pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, actively. And ibtigha', right, is actively seeking. Right? Is actively seeking something and taking the means to it. So that's the first quality, right? That the characteristics of the sincere in their good deeds is firstly that they actively work on their sincerity. And it is clear. Why am I doing this? Seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And secondly, that is the right of Allah. In your actions, the right of Allah is that you do it for His sake, actively. But you have a responsibility in the action as well, which is the aspect of tathbeet, right? Of confirming themselves. That you do it seeking to acquire the qualities that will be more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the action. Because what you do changes how you are. And Allah has called us to do certain things, but He's also called us to be a certain way. So the good deeds that we do, it's not just that I'm doing this to get this reward, but you're trying to use this as a means of islahul qalb, of rectifying your heart and having the qualities of being sincere, being true, having hope and fear and longing and sincere concern for others that are pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That entails, as this verse alludes to, three other qualities: striving, discipline, and consistency. Striving, that it's not simply sufficient to say that you want virtues, but you have to take the means, right? So you have that sincerity and the striving to change your condition through what you do, to becoming more pleasing to Allah in your state, but that you strive. Right? So it's not just a false claim. I'm seeking the pleasure of Allah. What are you doing about it? Nothing. The third is discipline. Discipline. That you nurture the soil, the earth of your heart and its soil. Right? So you have discipline. You're careful about keeping away from the things that pollute your soil. You're careful about what is motivating you. You're careful about how you respond. Because sometimes the action may be easy, but the follow through may be more difficult. Like the case of Auntie Huda. It was easy to give the 10,000. She's a multimillionaire. MashaAllah. We should get her to fund the hub, right? But that was easy. But the tests afterwards, right, are more difficult. Say, oh, we'd like to put a picture of you on our website as our donor. We want you to say some words. Say, oh, can I say a few words at the wedding? So people say, oh, Auntie Huda who helped us, this and that. They feel embarrassed, right? So, and those things will eat away at your reward. They could completely wipe away the reward, right? So that's why the good deeds require discipline to maintain sincerity and to take care of the right responses that take care of the health of your heart rather than the opposite. And the fourth is consistency, right? Consistency. The believer is of consistent good. When there's tests and trials, they're of abundant good, but even when nothing happens, they're still of good, right? Even if there's no rainfall, fatal, right? Then they're still due. They're still that good. Right? And that's the nature of the believer. The Prophet ﷺ compared the believer, actually he didn't compare the believer, he said there's a tree that's like the believer, which is the date palm tree. All of it's of benefit. That's the quality of the believer. And why? Because it roots itself deeply in the soil and it's not easily shaken. Right? And it bears fruit in all conditions. Right? So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have these qualities of sincerity and striving and discipline and consistency that are of the believer, and who take care that we do the good in the right way. And one of the keys to be able to do that is knowledge. One of the keys to be able to do that is knowledge. That you cannot do the good sincerely for the sake of Allah unless you know how Allah seeks for you to do that good. And also, one of the benefits of seeking knowledge is that not only does it show you how to do the good, but it shows you how easy the good is. Because sometimes many people think that doing the good is so difficult, that to give in charity, I have to wait until I have the right intention. But when you learn, you realize, no, it's much simpler than that. That give, and they'll tell you, for example, when you're going to give, make a quick dua. Do Allah make this sincerely for your sake? And if you ask the dua is a sign that inshallah you're sincere. Make a quiet dua to yourself. That the good is easy. You don't have to give a large amount. Yeah, give whatever you can. Right? So knowledge not only makes your action sound, but shows how easy the good deeds are. In some cultures, they say, well, if you're not praying all the sunnahs, there's no point in prayer. So I went back home once, and I was in a bit of a hardcore mood. I used to gather the whole family. I didn't go to the masjid. I used to gather the whole family and the servants and everybody to pray to. And I used to, like, someone's lying down, I had to get them. Said, it's time for congregational prayer. Get up. It was a bit over the top, to be honest. But there's one person who would say, I can't do it. So why? I said, because firstly, I need to change my clothes because these are not proper clothes to pray in. Number two, these days I don't feel the urge to do the sunnah, so what's the point of doing the fard? It doesn't matter how you, as long as you're not naked, pray. Right? It's better to pray in proper clothing, but if you get up, right? So sometimes lack of knowledge leads one to other modes of harm. So that's one of the keys here, is to know that knowledge empowers one to be able to do the action in the right way. And it shows how easy it is to do those right acts. Also, one of the reasons knowledge is needed is that you need knowledge not only of the outward aspects of the actions, but of the inward meanings of those actions. Sincerity. Sincerity is not easy to cultivate. It's a struggle. And the qualities of the sincere are many. So how do you cultivate it? Through the light of knowledge. But not just knowledge of the outward. One needs to balance the outward and the inward in our deen. The inward alone is not sufficient, because without outward expression is just false imaginations. But the outward without inward is hypocrisy. Okay? It's showing off. Okay? It's lifeless. It's ugly. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He direct us to the means to His good pleasure. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Before we close, any questions? Go ahead.
So when we look at our own personal state, and obviously each of us has our own finite needs for charity, and thinking about that, so how does one actually prioritize, right? Because there's so many ways to give. There's giving to a family, there's giving locally, there's giving to causes abroad, there's organizations, there's all sorts of different things. So, is there maybe a way to try to prioritize that? Like, do things that are more like sadaqah jariyah take priority?
Yeah. So how does one prioritize charity? There's not one answer, because otherwise all the charity will go to that one answer. Right? There's a few considerations. One is, one has to look at where has Allah placed one. Right? Where has Allah placed one, and what is what are the responsibilities that relate to you directly? The Prophet ﷺ, "Ibda binafsika thumma man ta'ul." Begin with yourself, then those you are responsible for. Right? So if you have needy family members, and instead you're helping strangers, Tisam the Hanafi said, given the hadiths about that, it's feared that such charity is not even accepted. That's a bit harsh, but because they have greater responsibility over you. So there's factors. There also may be a particular situation. Yes, there's people dying and being tortured all over, but you find someone who doesn't have anything for iftar. Right? They're just stuck, and you know who they are. They're not lying, or you don't distrust anybody. Someone, I lost my wallet. I'm stuck here on Tompkin Road. Right? So now that $5 could go a long way in Bangladesh, but here now is someone who's in immediate need of getting home, right? So sometimes the immediacy of a situation is another point of consideration. So your own immediate circle, immediacy of relation, immediacy of responsibility, immediacy of something you're engaged in. There was a big earthquake in Pakistan, what, in 2005, 2004? Northern Pakistan. So a whole number of my family members there, they go off-roading, so they took their jeeps with relief work, they took doctors with them, etc. They did relief work. I have a cousin who's a key member of the Pakistan Animal Welfare Society. So she wrote blogs, and if you read her blogs, you'd imagine that the earthquake only hurt animals. It says, in this village we saw a cat that lost its leg, and a cow that broke its hoof, all kinds of. I joked, were there any human beings in those places? Right? But sometimes, Allah opens a door of good for you. This is where you are at. You're not saying that this is the greatest, most important need of all, but this is a door of good that Allah has facilitated for you. So what do? You stick to it. Right? You stick to it. And it could be different things. One of the things that people used to do, a lot of in the old days, was to provide water to people who are out and about. Because in the old days, most people would be walking and in the sun, etc. So you provide water. That's not the greatest human need of all, right? But it's something of the good. If Allah facilitates for you, then stick to it. Another consideration in giving the good is good that's of lasting benefit, is of greater reward. Both lasting public benefit, but also for a person. If you're able to facilitate for a person ongoing benefit, that's excellent. That if you're wealthy, one of the really good things to do is to, while assisting a family in need, etc., to help their ongoing needs, is to try to help with the education of their children, for example, to facilitate tutoring, for example, for them. Because many times there's families who are, if they don't have a strong educational background, both parents may be working late, etc., there has to be some mechanism for their children to be able to study after school. Right? So you facilitate that, you facilitate college education for them, etc. That's a means of lasting good. One of my uncles, mashallah, he has a large factory in Pakistan, but he has everyone who works for them, he makes sure all their kids go through proper schooling. And proper schooling in Pakistan typically entails that it has to be some kind of private school, right? For it to be, but they have to, and he makes it a condition of work, and the company pays for it. I said they give decent wages, so we could pay you more, but this part of your wage, above and beyond reasonable wage, instead of just giving it to them, they themselves, the company pays for the kids' schooling. But when things are a bit tight, people would rather buy the house, buy a TV, buy an air conditioner, rather than sending their kids to a private school. But that's of greater benefit. But you have to do it in a dignified way. In a dignified way, not as a put down. So those are areas of concern. Things that are of eternal good are of greater benefit than things are of temporal good. So the ways of religious benefit are areas of good. But how does one prioritize? Of course, one can't possibly do everything. So one looks at those concerns. What is my circle of responsibility? What is my circle of circumstance? What are the opportunities that are before me? What is good that is lasting? What is good of religious benefit? And to try to have some mix therein. They say one of the wisdoms of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning the many categories of zakat is that it is from the guidance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to spread one's charity over different types of those who are needy. In the Shafi'i school, if you can, you could learn accounting by Shafi'i zakat. It's complicated, especially if you have many sources of wealth. And as I say, Shafi'i walks in. But rather, what you do is so in the Shafi'i school, you have to give in the stronger opinion, to a number of at least 3 of the 8 categories of zakat. Right? You have to spread it over a number of the categories. But that's a lesson too. That give to a number of places. You also learn that there's a charity that it's praiseworthy not to refuse anybody. Okay? But there's difference between token charity that one gives and where one directs the bulk of one's charity. So token, they say if you're able to, if Allah given means, if anyone's calling to some clear good, one should support it even if it's with a small giving. And Allah says, Wallahu yudha'ifu liman yasha. Allah gives increase to whoever He wills. And the people who do a lot of fundraising, and people like Imam Zayd have mentioned this, Shaykh Abdullah Idris, Shaykh Ala ad-Din al-Bakri, whole bunch of others, that, one thing strange at fundraisers is that always the people who give are the same people. And very often they're not the wealthiest of the people in the communities. Because Allah places, it's a promise that مَا نَقَصَ مَالٌ مِّن صَدَقَةٍ. No wealth diminishes through charity. So if you give regularly, Allah opens floodgates of facilitation in it. That's just it's a promise, and you see it very, very clearly in the lives of people. So that's part of it. If one can, one should give one's general charity, one should give some charity to anyone who's needy. But then to have a bulk of one's charity, which one considers carefully about what is the best way one could direct one's charity with these range of concern. And sometimes it's good to consult people who, one may have friends who of similar concern. In private, one may consult friends who give in charity, who are philanthropically inclined, people who some people of knowledge, to consult that this is how I'm thinking of directing my charity. What do you advise, etc. But it's an important question, because someone serious, they would give thought that how do I direct this money to the greatest, widest, and most lasting benefit. And then you give it knowing that you could have done better. So one gives charity out of a sense of shortcoming as well. That, oh Allah, you deserve better, your servants deserve better from me, but this is what I can do best. Which is why one of the adab in giving in charity, they say, is like in prayer, make istighfar after you give in charity. And one of the great 20th century Damascus scholars, Shaykh Jamaluddin al-Qasimi, has a treatise of Sirrul Istighfar, Aqib al-Ibadat, that the secret of seeking forgiveness after acts of worship. We do it after prayer, and there's a whole number of occasions. We just did a good, you ask Allah's forgiveness, that Allah deserved better. You could have done better. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to strive for excellence and sincerity in what we do. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا.